Welcome to Chapter 10 of Sherlock Holmes, The Case of the Silent Sovereign, a 12-part Sherlock Holmes mystery. Get comfortable, close your eyes, and let the story unfold. If you missed the previous chapter, please visit to my channel and enjoy the journey of Sherlock Holmes. Chapter 10, A Trap at the Observatory. The hours leading up to our rendezvous at the Royal Observatory were a blur of tense and purposeful activity. Holmes, with a clarity and focus that was breathtaking to behold, orchestrated our preparations like a general preparing for a decisive battle. His first stop was Scotland Yard. He sent a cryptic one-line message to Inspector Lestrade. Be at the Royal Observatory in Greenwich at midnight. Bring a dozen of your best men. The case of the Silent Sovereign is about to be closed. I knew that Lestrade, for all his bluster and professional jealousy, would not ignore such a summons. The lure of a high-profile arrest and the chance to finally definitively solve the case that had baffled him would be irresistible. Holmes's next task was to prepare our bait. He spent the afternoon in our Baker Street lodgings, surrounded by the papers of the late Lord Finch, creating a masterful forgery. He produced a set of schematics that looked to my untrained eye identical to the real plans for the silent weapon. But I knew that he had introduced a series of subtle but fatal flaws into the design, flaws that would render any device built from them useless. "The bait must be tempting, Watson," he said, as he carefully aged the paper with a solution of cold tea. "But it must also be harmless." As evening fell, a thick, cold fog rolled in from the river, blanketing the city in a shroud of grey. It was a fitting atmosphere for the night's dark work. We made our way to Greenwich by a circuitous route, taking a series of hansom cabs to throw off any potential pursuit. The Royal Observatory stood on a hill overlooking the city, a silent, brooding sentinel in the fog. Its domes and towers were silhouetted against the faint, ghostly glow of the London lights, a place where the precise, ordered world of science met the vast, chaotic mystery of the cosmos. We were met at the gates by a nervous, but resolute, Inspector Lestrade. He had, as requested, brought a dozen of his best men, who were now concealed in the shadows of the surrounding trees, their dark uniforms blending into the night. "Holmes," Lestrade whispered, his voice tight with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "What is this all about? Who are we waiting for?" "We are waiting for the real killer of Lord Alistair Finch, Inspector," Holmes replied, his voice a low, calm whisper. "And if I'm not mistaken, he is a man you know well." Holmes quickly and quietly outlined his plan. He had chosen the main observatory building as our stage. It was a place of complex machinery, of shadows and echoes, a perfect environment for a trap. He led us inside, into the great equatorial building, the heart of the observatory. The air was cold and still, and the only sound was the soft rhythmic ticking of the great clock that governed the time for the entire British Empire. In the center of the room, the massive equatorial telescope pointed towards the heavens, a silent, unblinking eye. Holmes placed the forged plans on a small table beneath the telescope, a single tempting morsel in the center of our web. He then positioned Lestrade and his men in the shadows of the upper gallery, giving them a clear view of the room below. "You will not move. You will not make a sound until I give the signal," Holmes instructed, his voice a low authoritative command, and the signal will be the sound of a bell. He and I then concealed ourselves in the darkness of the clock room, a small antechamber that housed the complex mechanism of the great clock. A small grated window gave us a perfect unseen view of the main hall. And then we waited. The minutes ticked by, each one an eternity. The silence of the observatory was profound, broken only by the steady, relentless beat of the great clock. It was a sound that seemed to mark the passing of a lifetime, the slow, inexorable march towards a moment of truth. Just as the clock began to strike the hour of midnight, we heard a faint sound at the far end of the hall. A door had opened, and a figure had slipped inside. It was the sailor, the man with the snake and anchor tattoo. He moved with a quiet animal grace, his eyes scanning the shadows, his hand held inside his coat, no doubt gripping a weapon. He was followed by a second figure, a man whose face was hidden by the brim of his hat. But I recognized his tall, imposing frame at once. It was Lord Harrington. They moved to the center of the room, their eyes fixed on the plans that lay on the table. For a moment they stood there, two dark figures in the vast, silent hall, a study in the unholy alliance of the high and the low, the aristocrat and the thug. "The plans," Lord Harrington said, his voice a low, triumphant whisper. "We have them." The sailor reached for the papers, but Lord Harrington stopped him with a raised hand. "Wait," he said, his eyes scanning the shadows. "Something is not right." He was a clever man, a man who had not survived in the cutthroat world of politics and power without a keen sense of danger. He sensed the trap. But Holmes had anticipated this. He had prepared a countermove. From my pocket, I produced a small silver bell, the one that Holmes had given me. I rang it once, a clear, sharp sound that cut through the silence of the hall. It was the signal. But it was not the signal for Lestrade and his men to attack. It was the signal for the trap to be sprung. Holmes had, in his earlier reconnaissance of the observatory, discovered a little-known feature of the building. The great dome which housed the telescope could be rotated by a complex system of gears and levers. And he had, with a few subtle adjustments, connected that system to the mechanism of the great clock. As the bell rang, the clock completed its midnight chime. And as it did, a low grinding sound filled the hall. The great dome above us began to move. Lord Harrington and the sailor looked up, their faces a mixture of confusion and alarm. The dome was rotating, and as it did, a series of shutters began to close, plunging the hall into an even deeper darkness. At the same time, a second set of gears engaged, and a section of the floor beneath the telescope began to descend, carrying the table with the precious plans down into the workshops below. The conspirators were disoriented, their escape route cut off, their prize snatched from their grasp. It was a masterful piece of theatrical engineering, a trap worthy of the genius of Sherlock Holmes. "Now, Lestrade!" Holmes roared, his voice echoing through the cavernous hall. The upper gallery exploded into action. Lestrade and his men swarmed down the stairs, their lanterns cutting through the darkness, their voices shouting for the conspirators to surrender. The sailor, a man of action rather than thought, drew a pistol and fired a wild shot into the darkness. But he was quickly overwhelmed, brought down by a swarm of constables. Lord Harrington, however, did not panic. In the confusion, He slipped away, melting into the shadows of the complex machinery that lined the walls of the hall. He was a fox, and he knew the terrain. But Holmes was the master of the hunt. He had anticipated this move as well. He emerged from the clockroom, a lantern in his hand, his eyes scanning the darkness. "It is over, Harrington," he said, his voice calm and steady. "There is no escape." He moved through the hall, his lantern casting long dancing shadows on the walls. He was a hunter, closing in on his prey. And then he stopped. He was standing before a large iron spiral staircase that led up to the telescope's viewing platform. And at the top of the staircase, silhouetted against the faint light of the fog-bound sky, stood Lord Harrington. He was not alone. He was holding a small, strange-looking device in his hand, a device of brass and glass and wire. It was a smaller, more portable version of the silent weapon, and it was aimed directly at Sherlock Holmes. The hall fell silent again, a tense, breathless silence. The hunter had become the hunted, and the final deadly confrontation was about to begin. Thank you for listening to Chapter 10 of Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes and the Case of the Silent Sovereign. If you enjoyed the mystery and want more stories like this, please subscribe to the channel, give it a like, leave a comment, and share it with fellow mystery lovers. Your support helps keep the stories alive. See you in the next chapter.